episode 4 of the live action season 2, and this is easily the arc I was looking forward to seeing adapted the most. I love kaiju movies, I love dinosaurs, I love the giants, and Little Garden contains all of those things at the very same time. There will be spoilers up to and including the latest chapter in the manga, so this is your final warning, and that warning is more necessary here for these episodes than any other, because obviously we are in elbaph right now. And just as I was anticipating, this is a goldmine for foreshadowing and referencing for what's to come in 1080 episodes time, or like in 20 seasons time for the live action if we do somehow end up getting all the way here. I have heard there are plans for 12 seasons to adapt the entire story, 6 for the pre-time skip and 6 for the post-time skip. I don't know how true that is, and I also don't know if it's, well, I do know that it doesn't seem like a good idea to me, because it doesn't seem to be anywhere near enough time to really give the rest of the story space to breathe, and if we're giving Alabasta the entirety of season 3 while cramming loads of arcs into fewer seasons moving forward, then that just doesn't sound right. But back to this, one thing to clear up right at the beginning is that these episodes are so much more than just foreshadowing or referencing. So here is my review / breakdown for episode 4 of season 2 titled Big Trouble in Little Garden. We begin with the scene of Robin, Miss Allsunday roughing up the crew and trying to dictate the course of the ship, and it does play out very similarly to how it does in the anime or manga. On the performances, first and foremost, the main attraction here is Lyra Abova, who is the actress who is playing Robin, Miss Allsunday. The look is really well put together, full purple. I like how soft-spoken she is, as she should be. She is the one in control. This confrontation is on her time, and it's less of a shakedown of the crew as much as it is a dissection, you know, getting to see who they really are. And we obviously have the benefit of knowing everything there is to know about, well, everything to do with the story, but particularly Miss Allsunday here. So you can see the similarities between her and Vivi, where she lost her home and has been on the run ever since, while Vivi is at risk of losing her home and possibly being faced with that exact same future. We were very recently given the good and bad timeline variants of Vivi in the future, so it's safe to assume she would have gone down a very bad path similar to Robin here. They have both worked for the same organization, Baroque Works, while wearing a mask to make sure nobody can really get close to them. Vivi more so to protect herself, given she's very new to this, and as the Princess of Alabasta she would pique anybody's interest, while with Miss Allsunday, Robin, you could say she wore the mask to protect others. As we can see when she abandons the crew in Water 7, she believes herself to be this walking disaster that breaks whatever she touches, so the life of an assassin here in Baroque Works, where the job is to break things, maybe felt like a good fit because of her self-loathing, not because she ever actually belonged in Baroque Works. And the idea of not letting anybody else in and trying to carry all of this weight on your own is another thing she shares with Vivi, who we know believes it's her responsibility alone to save her country. We have that infamous scene in Alabasta where Vivi and Luffy have that heated argument, but there's a lot more that ties these two characters, Vivi and Robin, together than first meets the eye, which is why the inevitable moment when Vivi reunites with the crew to see Robin there with them, who she still knows as Miss Allsunday, is going to be really good. So the offer of the Eternal Pose to Alabasta has been put on the table, and this moment hits really well too, when Luffy crushes it in his hand. It's a small detail, but they definitely never used real glass for this because it would be way too easy for Inyaki to cut his hand. So I wonder how they managed to get the effect of the Eternal Pose shattering to look as good as it did, because part of the reason this scene does hit for me is thanks to how satisfyingly it was crushed, you know. For example, back in season 1 when Luffy defeated Arlong using Battle Axe and it brought down the entire building, I don't think realistically the entire structure would have just collapsed like that, so of course creative liberties were taken to make the destruction look more destructive. Like, stuff I feel should retain its shape a bit better when it's broken rather than breaking into a million pieces. So the Eternal Pose shattering here like it does, breaking into many tiny pieces, completely falling apart, was satisfying to watch and listen to, like I said, but it also helps to sell how effortless it was, as it should be. Adds to the drama of the scene. Miss Allsunday does not decide the course of this ship, and back to her one last time, I feel like she's got the mannerisms of Robin down very well. Her small smile, her small shrug of her shoulders as she falls off the boat, and we have no idea what happens to her after that in the show, but in the manga we know she's riding a giant turtle, so for all intents and purposes that turtle could have been here too, we just never saw it. Now as for the arrival on Little Garden, the first real island of adventure, like something completely out of the ordinary, full jungle landscape that no one's ever seen before, and the same as with the other episodes, this one has some great moments for distinguishing each crew member. Here on the ship, before we actually step foot on the island, this is Vivi's first time truly experiencing the crew's dynamic, and I think they do a good job at showcasing how uneasy she is and that this just isn't the time to be playing around. So she's really the only one acting normal, which in turn canon really does a good job at illustrating that we are the weirdos here. I mean, we did already know this, but when you put a normal person a la Vivi next to them, it's as if what just happened on Whiskey Peak didn't just happen, though we know it's not due to a lack of caring, and that's something Vivi doesn't know yet. We see Usopp developing a case of can't go to that islanditis, a very rare disease, just his luck that he comes down with it whenever we visit a new island. The hunting competition is up and running, but the one thing that stood out to me was Sanji handing everybody their lunches for the trip, because it's such a normal thing to do in this crazy world. His goal is to make sure all the kids are fed, they're going out for the day, so make sure they don't forget their lunch. And now the adventure begins proper. They split up in the same way as in the manga, with the exception of Zoro and Sanji, who stay together because the hunting competition has been modified, but stuck on the boat is Usopp because his disease is really getting to him now. Bless his heart, he's trying to hide it from everybody else, not to worry them. He's pretending to fix up the Merry, and these next two episodes are his, by the way. He shines this entire season, but particularly here for obvious reasons, and one of those reasons comes stomping up to the ship because we have Brogy the Red Ogre making his presence felt literally. He looks amazing. The outfit is one thing, but also look at his nose. They would have been more than fine if they just used the actor's regular nose, but they went the extra mile to add this bulbous prosthetic to his face, and it looks great. The second thing as well is the facial hair, which looks great as a whole, but also notice how he has hair growing out of his nose. His nose hair is part of the beard. So these are just some really great design choices, and I've seen an interview with the actor where he explained how he shot the scenes using a miniature set while the crew shot using the actual Merry, and those two were combined for the final product. So it goes back to the production doing the best they can to keep things as practical as possible. The voice is really good as well, so just a really overall solid introduction to Brogy. But the first real big surprise on this island, and the one I am happiest about, is the dinosaurs, because I fully expected them to be fully cut out. We already have Dory and Brogy, so I assumed they would provide more than enough of a spectacle to really make this island and arc stand out. And as much as the production values its sense of realism with all of the practical sets and effects, there's a lot of CGI that's just unavoidable when it comes to One Piece, so removing the dinosaurs seemed like a good way to cut down on those costs since they aren't an absolutely necessary part of the arc. But it was a huge relief to see that they really kept them in, not only for the sake of the arc being more faithful, but just because I love dinosaurs from the Land Before Time and Disney's dinosaur when I was a kid, Jurassic Park or Jurassic World, having a huge toy box filled with nothing but dinosaurs, plastic rocks, plastic trees, and Optimus Prime, Prehistoric Planet, and now there's the new Netflix documentary series, The Dinosaurs. I am never going to grow out of this dinosaur phase. And even better is that Brachiosaurus is my favorite dinosaur of all time. That's what Luffy's riding here. But the best thing is the way they adapted them, because they never went for the realistic route where they make them as scientifically accurate as possible, or the Jurassic Park route where they try to make them more cinematic, you know. The choice was made to keep them light, keep them cartoony, keep them exaggerated, which is the perfect fit for this story. They have those rounded bodies you see from animated dinos, the big bellies, the curved body shapes. They even have eyelashes, so this is the best route they could have taken for the show, and it never even occurred to me that this was an option until I saw them in the trailers. And on top of the Brachiosaurus, we have our first mention of the biggest piece of the story that was cut out from this season but not cut out from the entire adaptation, Karu, so that confirms he does exist in live action canon. With Vivi saying he's back home in Alabasta, so we can put together she didn't want to put him at risk by bringing him along for the Baroque Works infiltration. But from a production standpoint, CGI is very expensive, and when weighing the necessity of different parts of the story, for example the dinosaurs or Karu, you'd say Karu is more necessary since he's an actual character, but given how much screen time he would have from Whiskey Peak to the end of the season joining us on the ship, meaning he's kind of gonna be there with us all the time, as compared to the dinosaurs who we do see here but they aren't the focus and we also leave them here, the cost differences tips the scales in the dinosaurs' favor now, and they already have their hands full with bringing Chopper to life in the final few episodes for this season where he is the focus, with Karu being in more episodes than Chopper, so I'm guessing the resources just weren't available for them to bring two very prominent CGI characters to life, at least for this season, because we now know he does exist, which means he is definitely going to be in season 3. And back to the dinosaurs again, we have Zoro and Sanji's hunting competition where they run into a T-Rex, and it has the old school posture you see in early dinosaur reconstructions where it's standing more upright like it was in the anime as well, so it's not just a Jurassic Park T-Rex replica, you know. One Piece dinosaurs have their own identity, but the competition is no longer about who kills the bigger prey, it's over who killed this one, meaning there's no Triceratops, 3 sword style against 3 horn style, but this is still good, and I never thought Sanji Sanji kicking a T-Rex in the face could be so brutal because he caves it in, meaning he broke its skull and he almost definitely broke its neck as well with the impact. So while Zoro's slash to its belly also would have been enough on its own to kill the T-Rex, I think I'm gonna give it to Sanji as the one who actually killed it, mainly because his attack landed first, which kind of levels things out because I'd say in the anime or manga Zoro's Triceratops was bigger based on weight than Sanji's T-Rex, even though it wasn't really a T-Rex since it had 3 digits on its hands. Then into Brogy's cave, which was filmed in the same way as him and the Going Merry full-sized and miniature sets. We start off with Usopp needing to distract him with one of his tall tales, and he talks about how he once defeated a mole monster with a multi-ton hammer, and that is 100% connected to Miss Merry Christmas in Alabasta, but also to the theory that all of Usopp's lies eventually come true. His lies are more like prophecies, and this one will be fulfilled next season. And they kept the Giants' laughter styles as well. You know, with all the things that they decided to include that I was fully expecting them to cut out, I now can't see how they could have put this season together without including those things. Like Dory and Brogy's laughs are part of their identities. Of course they couldn't have cut them out, so the misunderstanding is cleared up with proper introductions now, and I love Usopp's face when Brogy calls him the Lord of Destruction. That's a nickname which is new for this adaptation, so I wonder if it was added by the live action staff, or if this was something Oda told them to include because it hints at something for Usopp in elbaph right now or in the manga in the future, especially since there's a ton of other major stuff in the story to do with destruction, like the destruction of the world, the destruction of Fishman Island, Loki saying he's gonna destroy the world, destroying the Red Line. Maybe Usopp, the Lord of Destruction, has a role to play in all of that. And on the topic of remaining faithful, we move to Mr. 3, played by David Dastmalchian, and before seeing anything, we wondered if they were really going to keep the giant 3 on his head, or if it was gonna be too goofy for live action. And now I'm thinking there's no way he's Mr. 3 without it. They had no choice but to include it. It's the most iconic part of his design, and beyond that, there are some other design changes that work very well. His skin has been changed to be more pale now with a hint of white, which obviously is tied directly to his devil fruit abilities, and he also has white painted nails, so his whole vibe matches his powers. And David does a very good job at acting superior to Mr. 5 and Miss Valentine, more than just him being their superior, but the fact he believes himself to be better and smarter than them in general. But really, you can't have Mr. 3 without the massive 3. That's the main takeaway here. And the introductions do not stop there, because next comes the other giant on this island, and my personal preferred choice out of the two of them. We have Dory, the blue ogre, and from all of the promotional material, he was actually the one character I was most skeptical about, because there was something about his beard and helmet that just didn't look right to me. But I can happily say that after watching the episode and seeing a lot more of him, those issues faded away quite nicely. So as for what we do have here, just like Brogy, the rest of his outfit is really well made. I like how the sense of scale is portrayed in the scene where it takes place on the shore of the island, with Luffy and Vivi standing on a box which doubles as Dory's table. And I can see why they changed where Dory's residence is, because they wanted to show some differences between the giants instead of having them both live in the giant skulls, though I still think the skulls make for much better places to stay rather than just out in the open. Doesn't matter though. The main point to discuss with Dory is his voice. To begin with, I was very iffy regarding it because we know him to be equally as loud and outgoing as Brogy, but here they went with a calmer take on him, which is kind of interesting considering in later scenes we do see him being very expressive and raising his voice, and those are the scenes of Dory that I prefer in these episodes. But I'm assuming the rationale was the same as deciding where Dory and Brogy both stay, to differentiate between the two giants a bit more, and I can understand that fully, but I think it would have been better if he was still a loud and proud giant all the time like we've known him to be, because he's a giant from Elbaph, you know, he should always be loud and proud even in these quieter scenes. On Elbaph right now, have we met a giant warrior who isn't loud and proud? So they got this spot on with Brogy, but not so much here. But it's definitely not a deal breaker because like I said, in the rest of his scenes he is amazing, and the quieter talk does kind of grow on me. Anyway, the main part of this scene is the funeral pyre that Dory suggests is lit in Igaram's honor. I don't believe we've heard anything about this tradition in the manga, but maybe it is something that's going to be paid off in the future. For example, when this battle is over, whether we win or we lose, there are surely going to be some giants who lost their lives, and maybe they all have pyres built for them so their bodies can burn, so their souls can reach the heavens, aka heaven world maybe. I don't really have a genuine theory here, but the word heaven is a common theme, and the souls rise, the heaven world is above the sun world. I don't really have anything substantial here, but I do think this funeral pyre thing was a new detail that Oda told them to include, because I doubt the showrunners would add a new aspect to Elbaph's traditions and culture that Oda is unaware of. But but it's a nice scene where Vivi actually gets some closure on Igaram's death, especially since I'm sure he's actually dead here. And there's more, because you will have noticed these wooden carved totems next to Luffy and Vivi which have incredibly distinctive looks. We have Brogy, his best friend, and the guy he's been fighting for 100 years, so of course he would have one of him. There is one depicting the sun god Nika, wavy hair and everything, who is the god they worship on Elbaph, so that one makes a ton of sense as well. Although in the manga the god he mentions is the god of war, and up until very recently I assumed that the sun god Nika and this god of war were the same thing, like maybe the god of war that Dory mentions in Little Garden was Oda's earliest rendition of what would later become the sun god story anyway, so Nika being seen and mentioned makes perfect sense. The god of war and the sun god are the same entity, they are one and the same. But there is one major caveat to this that has just been revealed in the manga within the last 5 chapters, and while Nika being mentioned here still works in any case, we now know that the god of war is in fact its own individual entity in the story and not the same as the sun god. Meaning back in Little Garden, this god of war could very well have been who Dory was talking about, but because it was only just revealed to us this month, the live action staff would have had no way of knowing this. But even then, the sun god is still the much more prevalent of these two in the story, so Nika still makes all the sense in the world to be mentioned here, especially since it's the sun god who we see them worshipping in Big Mom's backstory during Whole Cake Island. Nika seems to be the much more relevant deity in elbaph mythology anyway. And speaking of, Brogy talks about just this, the annual winter solstice festival where they pay tribute to the sun god. He even mentions Semla, which is what Big Mom went crazy over, and this was the event where Big Mom killed Yorul, one of Elbaph's heroes, though Brogy wouldn't know any of this yet since he was fighting this duel long before Big Mom was even born, never mind this incident she caused on Elbaph. And this is the first time in the episode where the words sun god are explicitly stated. And we get a description from Brogy about Elbaph's appearance. He calls it a beautiful country, which we know is a fact, with a massive tree at its center, though the tree is basically the country itself, you know. The tree is at the center, at the left, at the right, at the top, at the bottom. The tree is everywhere because the tree is the island. And now I want to add that the soundtrack for Little Garden is by far my favorite out of any of the islands this season, and while I'm very sure it's partly because of my bias for the Giants, it's the same reason why I love the Giants that I love these OSTs. They feel epic, they feel majestic, like everything you would associate with them and Elbaph you can feel in these tracks, the sense of awe and wonder that comes with these guys, Dory and Brogy. And there's one song in particular that I call the Elbaph National Anthem, even though that's not what it's actually called, and it's the pick of the bunch, but we only hear that in full at the end of next episode during the credits. So everything we've seen so far with Dory and Brogy is exactly what I was hoping for, stuff that deepens the connection between Little Garden and Elbaph. Usopp asks a very relevant question about facing death, something I'm glad that these episodes address, but before getting his answer, the volcano erupts and we all know what that means. Talking about the soundtrack and Elbaph's national anthem, what plays now is an instrumental and slowed version of that as we get the details on this century-long feud. 73,466 duels, and the OST swells as he says this, which just adds to the gravity of this whole moment, makes it feel so big and important. Dory's doing the same with Luffy and Vivi. Giants live for 300 years as he rests his sword on his shoulder, and the thud that makes was so good, made it feel heavy. And this scene is one of those times where Dory's calmer voice worked for me, because while I still do prefer him in the anime, he's smiling here, and with his quieter voice it gives that vibe of a quiet confidence, which I don't mind at all. And the OST rises even more as we walk to the location where this duel is held, and this whole scene is just so incredible for me, and it's probably my biggest hot take for this season. While from a technical standpoint, choreography wise and camera work and stunt work wise, Zoro's 1 vs 100 on Whiskey Peak is better than this. It clears this easily, but this duel just means so much more to me. Like Luffy and Usopp, I love the Giants. Since meeting them on Little Garden, Dory and Brogy have been some of my cult favorites, you know, less prominent characters who I just have this huge affinity for. One, because they are giants, and giants being as big as they are is really cool, but also everything they stand for, warriors, honor, integrity, this is the good stuff. You don't know how happy I was when they showed up during Egghead, and now during Elbaph, even before things went crazy. I was already having the time of my life, so purely based on my own preferences, this duel carries so much more weight for me personally. And instead of jumping straight into the duel, we have a whole opening ceremony before it really gets going. There are pros and cons to this. Starting with the cons, there's no way they get new lids for these beer barrels every time they duel. Okay, that's not a real criticism, that's just kind of funny. And the other con isn't that big of a deal either, but I think them rushing at each other straight away like they do in the original makes much more sense, because they duel multiple times a day and have been doing so for 100 years. because they can't be doing this each and every time they fight. They know what's going on, so let's just get it started. The collision is their way of saying hello to each other, but on the other hand, the pros doing this for us, the viewers, why they fight, what this is all about, and because they also have an audience now, with the crew being here, so they might be making a bigger deal out of this for that one reason, for this one occasion. I really enjoyed watching this exchange before the fight, the hug, the words they spoke, valor, honor, glory, skull. This is what I'm talking about. I feel pumped, I feel ready to follow these two into battle. May the sun god Nika smile down with pleasure at what he witnesses. Going back to Dory's voice, this is what I meant when I said his voice is way more expressive in all of his other scenes, where he sounds much more passionate, and I love it. There's the Nika name drop, which I was fully expecting, and it made me smile from ear to ear, which to be honest I already was, because I don't know if I've mentioned this already, but I'm having such an amazing time right now. Plus there's one editing choice which they kept from season 1, and it's the split screens they do to show multiple characters or actions at the same time, and it feels very anime and manga coded because this isn't something that Western media often does, I feel like, and the intention behind it is to evoke the feeling of looking at manga panels, I'm guessing, which I think is a very inspired choice. And the duel begins, soundtrack going crazy, Luffy and Usopp going crazy, everything from the moment Brogy talks about elbaph all the way up to and including the duel is probably the part of this entire season I've rewatched the most, alongside with maybe the scene of Brook singing to Laboon. It's just such a great time, it feels big and it feels strong to me. You know, there's one shot where Dory's sword bounces off of Brogy's shield, and I don't think that's actually how a giant heavy sword should interact with a giant shield. It's like I said, from a purely technical standpoint, Zoro's fight last episode is leagues ahead of this, but it's the feeling and the meaning that makes this so good for me. Usopp's dream getting redefined, and we even see Vivi enjoying herself. Even she knows how amazing this is, but I also see Vivi laughing as her allowing herself to let go a bit, releasing some of her stress given the weight that's on her shoulders. She's allowing herself to enjoy this moment amidst all the stress she's been under, and she's smiling here at this sight, now having been with the crew and seeing how they work, how they choose to live. So I like the idea that her enjoyment here is partly down to the influence they've had on her in this short amount of time. And although I haven't talked about it yet because I've been too busy fanboying over Dory and Brogy, we do have other Baroque Works agents here outside of Mr. 3, starting with Mr. 5 and Miss Valentine, who did follow us here, and we know how Mr. 5 uses his abilities to meddle with the beer, and that is changed up for the adaptation. Instead of Dory's beer being spiked, it's Brogy's, and it explodes mid-duel, which allows for Dory to finish him off. To begin with, I was wondering what the point was in switching that around, and I've seen the idea floating around that the reason they did this is because Brogy wins in the manga, so having Dory win here balances out their score again. And I do like that, but I have my own thoughts. I said these are Usopp's episodes, but I don't think I've talked about him enough. Really, next episode is where he really shines. Here though, he was scared to death on the Merry, had to work up the courage to talk in the cave. He became more comfortable on the island than anybody else, and he's now found something that materializes his dream, and all of this is thanks to Dory and Brogy. So I think the reason behind having Brogy lose the duel is because out of the two giants, he's the one who Usopp has grown closer to, meaning his supposed death would mean much more to Usopp, who has done a 180 on this island thanks to Brogy's words. So from that point of view, I think it's a solid change to make, especially given what we see between these two next episode. So Mr. 3's plan is going very well so far, and his partner has been playing her role very well too. Miss Golden Week is here with her multicolored prowess, and her power is used partly for laughs in this, like in the anime, but they also do a very good job at showing that as obscure and seemingly unthreatening her and her powers may seem, there is a very deep darkness there as well. I've spoke about whether the height of Brooks' actor or the voice for Igaram's actor was on either of their criteria. I get the feeling the height of the actress was important here because Miss Golden Week is very short in the original, and they somehow found an actress that looks the part, fits the part, and plays the part of Miss Golden Week incredibly well, where she also gets some more time to shine next episode too. But into Brogy's cave again, where Dory honors him as a warrior of elbaph who fought despite foul play, so he won't dishonor that decision by disregarding the duel, but that does not mean he won't seek vengeance against whoever did this to him, which is where Mr. 3 pins him to the wall. And Dory's actor does a great job at showcasing the anger and pain in his voice when he shouts at Mr. 3, and we see the wax fruit on display as he is fully encased by Mr. 3's abilities. I will say though that my one issue following this is the way Dory becomes a non-factor in the next episode, because even Brogy, who was chained down and restrained for the rest of the conflict in the anime and manga, will was still nearby to let his emotions be known, to give some fighting words, though it does show Mr. Three's conniving nature, I guess. But on the upside, if sidelining Dory was the reason we were able to get a lot more out of a certain individual next episode, then I think that's a fair trade. And finally, the episode ends with Vivi, Nami and Zoro trapped and hung up inside Mr. Three's wax house, leaving Usopp as the only one left who actually knows what's going on, because Sanji was preoccupied with the dinosaur meat and his boning knife. I think I've made it pretty clear that even with some minor issues which I can easily look past, I absolutely loved this episode. I think I've seen it ranked among the bottom 2 episodes of the whole season, which isn't saying much since it's still an 8.5 out of 10 or around that number. But even so, I'm sure you understand why, based on what I've said and how I've made my preferences known, that this episode is in my top 3 for the season, behind only episode 2 and episode 7. The arc I was looking forward to the most, and it lived up to my expectations, but the arc is not done here because David Dasmalchian and his posse needs to be dealt with, so we continue next episode and finish off Little Garden.